Okay, I believe we are recording. Maybe question mark. Yes. Okay. What's up, everybody? It's Bear with BearIndependent.com. I am joined by the one, the only Christian, the Ice Age Farmer. I'm very excited that you're here. I've been a huge fan for so long, and I've really been encouraged to see your channel grow the way that it's grown over the last few years that I've been aware of you. And I've always told my subscribers, whatever your subscriber account is, it should be 10 times that, because you have excellent information. You present it so very well. I have no idea where you learned to speak so well, but I'm kind of covetous of that. You do an awesome job, and you're positive. Unlike a lot of the people out there in this space that are all, doomer porn, pants on fire, you are not that way. And so thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to chatting with you, sir.
I'm thrilled to be here, Bear. Thanks for those kind words.
Of course, man. You're a rock star. We'll just get that out of the way. You're a rock star. And thank you for doing what you do. It lights up my day. But I don't watch your videos unless I have expendable income to go buy food storage. Because every time I watch an SH Farmer video, I'm like, we gotta do more, man. We gotta do more. And so, it's springtime here in Oklahoma, and we're planting gardens, and we're bucketing up food, and we're raising livestock, and we're doing all the things that I know how to do. And I've actually found that for me to be quite restorative in the age of COVID, as far as being able to take positive action to deal with some of the anxiety of this fragile system that we're all dependent upon. And which leads me to my first question, which, by the way, our patrons at Bear Independent Patreon channel provided a bunch of the questions. So my first question for you is, how is your mental health currently, and what are you doing to maintain it in the age of COVID?
That's a fantastic question. It's a heck of a place to start, too. I will be perfectly candid, because I don't think it's worth being any other way, and say that, I think we're all under a great deal of stress. And then, since you asked me personally, I had a loss in my family. Actually, I know you did too, and my condolences there, Bear.
Likewise, buddy.
So I had a loss in my family a couple weeks ago now that precipitated, going to be with family and spending time with them. And beyond the grief of the loss itself, there was also the just the slap in the face of, here you are with your family that you grew up with and you still love, but like, they're all now mask wearing, vaccine slamming people who think that you are the end of the world, because not only are you talking crazy talk like you used to, but now you're threatening my life. And that was as difficult to it's I'm working on that. I'm working on metabolizing that experience just as I am the grief. And so I just wanted to normalize that. I think we're all going through, with our own families and our friends, those kinds of experiences. Even just the idea that, you go outside and you see little kids and think about their experience. I got two little kids who are dealing with all the changes, the loss of school. So there's a lot to deal with right now, even just thinking about it emotionally. And so I am being candid here, because I think that we need to be able to do that, to have a healthy conversation about this, to normalize it between two men, like this conversation, two humans going through this. It's really crazy out there. It's a really trying time. All things considered, I think that I'm doing all right, right? I'd like to think my mental health is all right, because I spend a lot of time working on that. I spend a lot of time, and part of the reason I also am sharing this much is because I want it to be clear that I do reflect on my inner state. I do acknowledge. My wife is a therapist, so I do acknowledge that everything we're going through is traumatic, and these have very real effects. Grief and trauma are huge parts of the human experience, and to just say, all of these things that are going on in the world have to inform not just how we prepare for what's ahead, but how we take care of ourselves. And so all that to say that, yeah, I think the way that then that's the question, how do you take care of yourself? And yeah, a lot of that is, like you said, just getting out and gardening. That is both one of the most fun and rewarding and spiritually connected activities that I can imagine, but it's also a natural response to failures in the supply chains, the agendas that are being perpetrated to take total control of our food. And so that's one where I do spend a lot of time, because it's sort of at the center of how we respond to the threats, and then what's good for us anyway, and how I connect to God. All of these things are encompassed in this one answer. So yeah, my hands are dirty right now. I'm sore from being out there, and I'm headed right back out there after our conversation.
I love that, man. It's been like 4 of the last 7 days at my house have been inadvertent arm day. And so my whole upper body is super sore from shoveling mulch and turning compost and filling pots for planting. And it's like, I just, that my whole, it's a good sore, but you know, it's one of those things I think that a lot of people don't realize, especially in the preparedness community, how much work it takes to get started, and that there's a momentum there. Once you got it going, once you have systems in place, you still have to put input. There's still blood, sweat, and tears required. But if you don't start now, you're going to be so far behind the power curve when you actually need that food. It's not just a nice to have, it's the need to have. And so I, like you, am constantly trying to encourage people to go put your hands in the soil, go grow food. Even if you live in an apartment, okay, get 3 5-gallon buckets, grow a tomato, grow a pepper, grow some cilantro, and make salsa. There are no excuses. Go do something positive. And, you know, that I think that's one of the things with this whole global pandemic thing. And I only recently figured this out, that really deeply bothered me was A, being told I was non-essential, and B, being told there was nothing I could do about it. That's not how I function, bro. I'm like, oh, there's a problem. Let's fix this thing. In it, through it, around it, over it, whatever we got to do. I'm a problem solver. And so to be told, A, we don't need you, and B, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Really, I think on a deep level, I internalized that for some reason. And there was a lot of anger that was manifesting itself. Luckily, I'm kind of over that. I'm back towards rational thinking. Anger is an irrational emotion, as most emotions, all emotions are. But it wasn't until I really figured that out, just how personally I took it, to have somebody tell me that we don't need your help and there's nothing you could do about it anyway. It's like that it rails against my ethos of personal responsibility and action over anxiety and going and making stuff happen. So could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, have you found any, and I realize we're kind of on maybe the spiritual aspects of what we're going to talk about more than the physical aspects, which we'll get into in a moment, but have you found that there's been any change in your sense of purpose and your fulfillment as to how you do things now versus a year ago?
I would say there's more of a sense of urgency to all of it, to the message spreading and to the preparations personally, right? Like before, and it's even a little less fun, because before it was much like, let's look at the science, and there are these cycles of the sun, and it looks like we're heading into, and now it's like, okay, they're openly, Rabobank 2 days ago just said, hey, we're going into a biblical food crisis. This commodity super cycle combined with the shortages and the weather concerns, everything combines with the supply chain collapse to look at food prices that are going through the roof. So it's no longer really like studying things and speculating and trying to figure. It's like, oh, it's here now, and
Right.
and we gotta deal with this. So I'm getting much more involved locally as well. Before it was much easier for me to, like I said, sort of retreat from the mask wearers and just go talk online. I prefer to spend time like having this conversation with other people that can recognize what's going on and have cogent conversations about how to respond to it. But now it's much more like, hey, this is real. There is a point at which the grid or the internet or both go down, and if we don't have some of these relationships already in place and have people thinking in the right directions here, then we're losing that battle. So yeah, all of these things have inspired a much more of a sense of urgency than before. It's not an academic exercise at this point. This is real.
I agree with that. It's almost a strange relief that, okay, we're here now, right? It's there. No longer am I wondering, could it be, could it not be? We're here now, and this is something you've been talking about for a long time. I've often felt like one screaming in the wilderness going, I wish people would just understand. But now people that have, funny letters after their name and global powers are admitting that there's real problems here, and they're not likely to reverse themselves. Which brings me to my next question. What are you personally doing, to the extent that that you're comfortable discussing? What are you personally doing both for food storage and for food production where you're at? Like what methods, are you throwing stuff in buckets? Are you using hydroponics? Because I know a lot of my viewers are familiar with you, but not all of them are. And to that point, iceagefarmer.com. You're also on YouTube. You're on Patreon. You're not difficult to find. If you just go to a search engine, put in Ice Age Farmer, you can find Christian. And you should be familiar with him. But for those that aren't, what are your food storage and food production plans? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I was in San Francisco when I started the channel, and so part of this answer is getting out of the city for me. But that also informs that, I started without much space, without any land for one, and without much space to even work on this answer. So some of those initial efforts at growing food were, small systems, aquaponics systems that could fit in a garage. And I continue to run aquaponics because it's just such a nice little, beautiful, efficient, closed loop thing where, it's really great for even doing starts. I'll often do start some things in there and then eventually plant them out into the garden. But yeah, so although I do have the garden, the emphasis for me right now is on protein and then seeds, because I think we want to be arming ourselves with seeds. I see a lot of activity around stopping the sale of seeds, and generally just the need for us all to have nice, ample supplies of seeds that we can arm our neighbors with as they start to figure out what's going on too and build up their own gardens. It's going to take all of us there with those seeds. So focusing on, I did an interview with Gabe Brown, who was a regenerative rancher in North Dakota, and the way he said it was just figure out what you can do, a couple things that you can do really well, and then milk them. Just run it into the ground, right? And so for me, yeah, I figured out a few of those crops the squash is one that which is actually pretty rich in calories, and so I can pump out more squash than we could possibly want to eat, and I can a bunch of that. And every season it gets a little more informative, like, oh, we still have carrots from last season, so I'm not planting as many of those this time. And just trying to make sure as you build up your pantry, it becomes more obvious like what your usage patterns are and when you need to be working on those things. But yeah, bottom line as far as like how do we brace for the impact here is I want as many seeds in my buckets as possible, because I'm already at the point where I just give them to friends. Like the more people that are growing, the better, as far as I can tell. And then protein, I think, is a big issue here. You see a lot of war on meat, a lot of threats to producers and ranchers as far as the cost of animal feed, and then pressures, regulatory pressures, governments moving the goalposts as far as how many feet per animal they're allowed to keep legally, which of course is going to send some people out of business because they just can't afford to raise animals anymore. So there's a big attack on that. And so to that end, yeah, I've been spending a lot of time raising animals, which means building facilities for them, right? It's just everything, finding out all the things that can go wrong with like egg bound hens and climbing all of those learning curves.
Yep.
I know you can find plenty of really good people on YouTube climbing those same learning curves. And then right now I'm spinning up a new aquaponic system because the rabbits are great. I'm pumping out protein from the rabbits, but in the heat of the summer, they don't like to have as many babies. So I'm trying to find out something to complement the protein production in that season. And right now I'm spinning up a tilapia based aquaponic system that I think could at least, I don't know, it's worth a shot. I've just used goldfish to date because they were so tolerant. If it's cold, if it big swings, whatever, the goldfish have just been soldiers with me since the beginning. But someone finally pointed out, like, you kind of forgot to go back and finish the idea of aquaponics is that you're getting plants and fish. So I was like, all right. So yeah, I got some tilapia, and we'll see how that goes. But big emphasis on protein and doing whatever you can do in the space you have. And then, yeah, that's where I am.
That's cool. We did rabbits years ago, back before I personally started keeping the Torah. And I had 1 buck and 3 does, and I believe we got somewhere around 200 pounds of rabbit meat a year. And we also did them in a colony with chickens below the cages, which was a concept that I borrowed from Polyface Farms, Joel Salatin and Daniel Salatin. And oh my gosh, the compost that we got out of that was just gorgeous. And, permaculture kind of gets a a bad name from a lot of people because they think you got to be like a crusty hippie in order to be into this stuff. And I'm the antithesis of a crusty hippie, but I love it. I absolutely love it. You know, you look at guys like Matt Powers and like, that guy is awesome. He has a huge heart. He has a huge mind. He knows his stuff, but just the fact that he's him is going to turn him off to a lot of people. It shouldn't, but it does. But these principles, you know, backyard rabbits, backyard chickens, a compost pile, and raised beds. We were doing this in North Texas on 1/3 of an acre in our backyard. And we were literally producing 40% of our calories without trying. It was a few hours a week just to maintain it. We had row crops in our backyard and berry bushes and pecan trees, and it was gorgeous. It was lush, and there was a lot of productivity there, again, with that momentum. We got started. It took time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears and treasure to get started. But once we got started, it was only a few hours a week to maintain that productivity. And there's nothing better, you know, fresh eggs that are your eggs and you know what your chickens ate, or maybe you want to eat a chicken. There's nothing that tastes better than that chicken, right? So, you know, again, I can't encourage people within the sound of my voice more strongly to, whatever your excuses may be, to eradicate them and just start producing food. The garage aquaponics system, that's awesome. You know, we're putting up a greenhouse this within the next month. We're putting up a greenhouse, and I'd like to do aquaponics in the greenhouse as well, and use some of that water as a thermal battery, so forth and so on. But because the idea of tilapia intrigues me, you know, and we started with chickens and then goats. Like I said, we had meat rabbits back in the day. And now we have sheep. We have so many sheep that we're now giving sheep away to other people because we just can't keep up. And now we've got these zebu cattle, which full grown are only about 500 pounds. You know, you and I, if we needed to, could butcher one out in a morning. And that's why we went with that breed. And it just keeps growing. And there's these layers of resilience there. Maybe you get the chickens involved where they're scratching through, and turkeys. We have turkeys, which are awesome for soil building. And it all just kind of works, you know. But if you're in a backyard, you can start with, in some places, depends on where you are, but you can start with backyard chickens and or backyard rabbits, raised beds, and compost. And I made 10 yards of compost with a shovel and snatching up my neighbor's bagged leaves in the fall and the scratch for my chickens and all that, and beautiful black dirt that produced some of the best produce we've ever had. You just got to put the time into it. So cool. I had another question for you.
Okay.
Are you, and you can answer this however you want. Are you actively involved in a mutual assistance group? Are you coordinating with other people, or is this, are your efforts for you and your household, or are they larger than that?
I think my efforts start here at the household, and then, you know, this is because it's a virtuous cycle, like you're saying. The more you start to grow, you just can't help but get to a point where you've got more than, you know, I've got more than enough seeds of anything I could want to plant here ever again. And so I have started giving these away, and a lot of that looks for, you know, people who have complementary parts to the equation. Like, I don't have alpacas or llamas, but my neighbors do. And so if I'm in severe need of manure, which I'm not often anymore because of the rabbits, but there was a time when I was, and so we would trade it for that. And I can imagine that if I needed some alpaca fur at some point, that we could have a conversation there. And so finding those people who are of similar mindsets, but working with different backgrounds, different experiences, different resources of their own, and then aligning yourselves is absolutely part of the big idea here. I did a talk called The Greater Food Transformation, which was all about how when we start doing the right things, when we start making, you know, the investments into these virtuous cycles on our own, with our own families and with our own, even with ourselves, you know, like we talked about with self-care in the beginning here, all of this really flows together. And as we do the right things, as we make those right choices in our own lives and with our own homesteads, then I think you can't help but just have an emergent, decentralized system that is a mutually assistant, you know, it's a synergistic relationship that's good for all parties involved. That's sort of a voluntarist way of thinking about things as well. But so no formal, I will do this in exchange for you, and at the end of the season we'll have to reconcile. It's more
Right.
just that everyone's doing what makes sense, and good things happen as a result of that. Yeah.
That's cool. I love that you use the word decentralized as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm all about that. That's why the channel's called Bear Independent.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people miss that. Is our goal is to be as independent from this fragile system as possible. And I kind of say tongue in cheek that I would like to find out that the world has ended a few weeks later when somebody comes and tells me. Um, I don't want a front row seat for that. I'd like to be back in the woods with my sheep eating a cucumber we just picked, going, oh, hey, things are awful quiet around here. What happened?
Who'd have known? Yeah, exactly.
Right. But I love that concept of decentralization, because I think that we have personal rights and responsibilities. And I think the more of that responsibility that's vested in us rather than our overlords, the better things are going to go for us. And the more we lean into that responsibility, the better things are going to go for us. Not just when we're dealing with a fragile system, but especially when we're dealing with a fragile system. And so I also love that you use the phrase arming my neighbors with seeds. I think that's awesome. That's a great way to look at it, because I don't think many people that are into preparedness, which is kind of my bailiwick, tend to think of things that way. There's generally an emphasis on firearms and security and plate carriers and rifles, and you can't eat any of that. It's not that maybe you don't need that stuff. You can't eat it. And so I love the phrase arming your neighbors with seeds. Are you storing any seeds long term? And if so, how are you doing that?
Well, I think the best way to keep your seeds is to keep growing them out every season for a number of reasons. For one, that way they're always fresh and ready to go. But also, when you keep seeds, when you grow something and save the seeds, it's actually learning about where you are. And so this is something that that we should all be doing. If you just go order the 79 seed packs in one survival seed pack and then let it sit under your bed, those things are getting old. And for another, so you're already like playing with questionable germination. You don't have any experience with those, and who knows where they came from, which means that if they were from somewhere in Missouri and you're in an entirely different climate, then it's gonna take them a season or two to acclimate, literally. Whereas if wherever you started with them, if you're building up your seed stock, it's called building a land race, where the seeds that you are uh, in relationship with, really, have already seen where you are growing them. They've already experienced the kind of water you have and the kind of cold mornings or whatever it is that you're dealing with where you are. And so they've encoded all of that into their genetics, and that next generation of seeds is like ready for that and primed for it and does better with it. So yeah, I would encourage people to actively be growing out the seeds that they like, tying that, marrying that with whatever you like to eat. Like I said, if you find out that I made a bunch of carrots last year, but we didn't eat them all, so I'm not going to grow any this year. I've got more than enough onions, so that's great. That frees up more space for potatoes or other calorie crops. Play, work on it, but be a little playful with it and see how things work out with you. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you use the phrase marry, because back in the day, part of in several areas of this country and prior to the United States existing, part of the dowry was these are our family heirloom seeds. That's what an heirloom seed was. You'd pass, this is granny's squash or, grandpa's sweet corn or whatever. And they were those seeds that had adapted generation over generation to grow in that area, in that climate, with that soil, with that sunlight, with that rainfall. You're absolutely right. As you hit the nail on the head as always. And so I appreciate you answering that, because a lot of people, again, in the preparedness community, have this mindset of put it in Mylar, vacuum seal it, put it on a shelf, it'll be there when I need it. But seeds aren't necessarily, they're not best done that way. Precisely what you said is how we like to do it, is to grow out what we like. We have awesome Cherokee purple tomatoes. They rock. I've never had a better tomato, and every year they get a little bit better and a little bit better.
That's a really good point. Just to amplify that a little bit, like that tells you that is true wealth when that's part of your marriage present. Like here it is the keys of the kingdom. This is the most valuable thing we can give you to ensure your success as a newly married couple. Are these seeds? Take them wherever you go and plant them. And that's really insightful. You can also look at the fact that for decades now, seed companies have been trying to take over the entire genetics of the earth. They've been, Monsanto and Syngenta have been just constantly merging and acquiring other companies to get more and more of the seed stock Bill Gates now is out there doing the seed genomics to try and scan the DNA of everything. They really just want to get all of that data and then CRISPR modify it and patent it and sell it off. That is the, really just corrupting God's creation. But again, the fact that they are so bent on controlling those genetics is another key indicator that there's real wealth here to be had, and we should be exploiting that. We should be using it.
So to that point, how do you see, with your worldview, your experience, and with the information that you're bringing in every day, because you do an awesome job at staying up to date on this stuff. I mean, whenever somebody has questions relating to the type of things that you're into, specifically the food shortages, the seeds, everything that you just discussed, I always tell people, go see Christian at Ice Age Farmer. I also recommend to them David Devine at Adapt 2030. I don't stay as in that information flow as you do. I tend to actually come to you for that information. And so given that, how do you see, in light of all the geopolitical shenaniganry going on around the world right now, 30,000 foot overview, where do you see this thing going? On a worldwide scale and on a United States scale, on what timeline do we devolve into the point where those seeds are going to be a need to have, not a nice to have?
Well, I would still argue that they're a need to have now, right? I think the window is closing rapidly. We've already seen Amazon stop selling seeds after this Chinese mystery seed thing. It's kind of a gamble to wait for anything at this point. So I would, maybe it's just call it getting ahead of the game and get into it now. But so in terms of the timeline, right? They are pretty open about the fact that this decade is their decade of action. We're going to realize all of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. You're going to experience, I couldn't believe when they actually used these words at the World Food Systems Summit, you will experience vertigo because of the rapid pace of change in our food systems and everything during this great reset over the next 10 years. They've openly said by 2030, the World Economic Forum lets us know you're not going to own anything anymore. So it's going to be pretty wild, right?
And you'll like it. You'll own nothing, and you'll like it.
The big old Happy Meal communism there. So based on some of these phrases and some of those timelines, we can expect this is going to be a very eventful decade. People who are aware of the Deagle predictions, which is only 3.5 years out before we lose like more than half of the U.S. population, if you put stock into those, it's also pretty good indicator that we're at go time, right? This is pretty much where the rubber is meeting the road in terms of these agendas and whether or not humanity is going to respond to them collectively. So,
it's a strange feeling for me to think that my children could very possibly have less freedom, less economic opportunity, a lower quality of life than what I've experienced. I don't have to dig very deep to find facets of that are heartbreaking to me. There's nothing about that puts a smile on my face. And it's a big part of why we've kind of pulled back from this system. I don't want to be dependent upon it at all because I can see the writing on the wall. And I think that's why the powers that be, if you'll allow me that phrase, take offense to channels like yours and channels like mine and will perform shadow bans and throttle us and otherwise limit our voice. I've been, just speaking plainly, really demoralized at times to see how little of our audience actually gets to see our content, that you have to actively go and seek it out to find it. And I think that one could make the argument that, well, that's all part of the plan, Bear. Maybe it is. Maybe it's, just a side effect for them that works positively in their favor. I don't know, but I found it, especially in the last year, quite frustrating at times to try and continue to bring the word, to spread the message, to stay plugged in and not be demoralized. I'm curious to know if you've experienced any of that as well.
Certainly I've experienced the censorship. Yeah, I mean, from early on with the YouTube channel, there's complaints about notifications not going through, and oh, I've been unsubscribed to your channel over and over, and that's gradually now given way to the point where we lost the Ice Age Farmer Discord server because they said there was misinformation flowing through it. So I think there were like 6,000 people that were connected through there in a bunch of networking groups. Oh,
Oh, I got you.
So that it was a shame, right? There's thousands of people that were talking to each other there, but we got blown away from misinformation. And then it's similarly with the Twitter account that got blown away a couple months ago now. So it is just something that I expect to happen to those of us who are trying to talk about what's actually going on here, which is obviously not in the interest of those people who are trying to take total control. Yeah.
And you do believe that it is total control?
I don't think there's any question. Yeah, these are the people that print the money, so it's obviously not a fiscal thing that they're after. Yeah, I think it's a spiritual warfare that we're involved in here.
I would agree with that completely. You had brought up a bill earlier. Could you refresh my memory of what that was?
Yeah, I just was delighted to see that Illinois actually had a bill, HB 633, is its latest incarnation, that is all about protecting the right to garden. And so, this says that you're not allowed, municipalities basically aren't allowed to say at the city level or even at the HOA level that they can't tell you can't have a garden in your front yard. They can't tell you that you can't have a small structure for your chickens or something like that. If it's about food production, and particularly in the wake of some of the shortages last year, in the beginnings of the COVID nonsense, I'm just really pleased to see some momentum at trying to reverse this course here. And so HB 633 up in Illinois was one bill that says, yeah, we're not going to let people regulate your ability to grow food. So there's a good sign there. Some people have already said, this is what a sad day it is that we actually have to pass a bill to protect what should be a constitutional liberty anyway. And while I'm receptive to that thinking, I'm still going to embrace the fact that there's someone at some level within, especially at the state level, right, to actually reassert what should be those natural rights and say, yeah, to those of you at the municipal level, county, city, HOA, whatever it is, you can't do this anymore. This has got to come to an end here. So yeah, it's really good.
The idea that we have a constitutional republic is something that I don't know if I agree with anymore. So just because something is, we have these God-given constitutionally protected rights, I'm a deeds not words guy, right? And so if the Constitution isn't treated as the highest law of the land, it doesn't matter. And there's so many facets of our life that we experience at this point that it should be X, but it's actually Y because of that state level, city level, municipality, even an HOA say, no, you can't have chickens, man, they're a disturbance. Yeah, they are, but I'll eat them, so don't worry about it, But I think there's this concept called an OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And I fear sometimes that the masses, even if they're observing, if they're paying attention to what's going on, they still haven't truly oriented on the fact that time is short. These things are rapidly approaching and there's an acceleration to this. And then after you've observed that and you've oriented on the fact that it's happening, you still have to decide what you're going to do about it. And then you have to act on it. Then you have to actually do it. And you had mentioned before we started recording that there was another website that you're plugging people into to find each other. What is that? Because I'd like to give people some real practicality. What can they actually do to combat this? We've talked about arming your neighbors with seeds and going out there and growing food and all that. But as far as connecting with like-minded people, would you speak to that?
Yeah, well, connecting with like-minded people in your local area is good as well. The site you're talking about is greaterfoodalliance.com.
Yes, thank you.
This is something that I put together because in the recognition that it's not enough just for us all to be growing food and arming neighbors with seeds and taking what would seem to be a normal, rational response to some powers of people trying to take control of the food supply, because they are using legislative and regulatory means to preclude us from building up local food systems at this point. And they're pretty open about that, but in only a few words, it's basically they're making the case that farming and ranching and traditional human activity as we've always known it is now dirty and dangerous, and it's why we have pandemics, and we can't be allowed to plant your own home gardens anymore. You have to get it plastic wrapped from, you know, the lab grown meat source, the billionaires, and so we have to respond to that as well. And so the Greater Food Alliance is a recognition of that we need everybody at all levels. If you're, you know, a computer programmer guy, we're going to need to put those skills to work, because there are farmers who lost their markets as these restaurants go out of business. They had distribution deals, and they now need to be connected back to people to be able to sell their product into the market. If you're a lawyer or an activist, there are, you know, we need your help in taking bills like HB 633, or the Wyoming bill, which also said, you know, we don't need to, in the beginning of, it's like March last year, when some of those USDA meatpacking facilities started shutting down, there was a bill in Wyoming that said, okay, in that case, just get out of the way. We've got animals here that need to go to the market. We got hungry people here. There should be no red tape anywhere that keeps us. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? There should be no way that good food can't get connected with good people. And so whatever federal apparatus is here, it's no longer here. Just get out of the way. And they carved out some exemptions. And that's the kind of really creative, thinking that we need to be doing, no matter what your profession is, no matter what your background is in. We need all hands on deck right now to be greasing the skids for the local food systems right now. So yeah, greaterfoodalliance.com is also because I've heard from people at local grocers or farmers markets that have been getting shut down, again, in the interest of public. It's just unbelievable how people will swallow these things. But now that, you know, we need social distancing at your farmer's market and you weren't following OSHA regulations, so we're shutting you down. And you can petition, but that process is closed due to COVID. It's really ridiculous. So to get these people out of our way, yeah, we need all hands on deck. Taking laws like this, turning it into a template that we can share out with, you know, everybody should be able to take a few of these kinds of examples of laws to your city, to your county, to your state, and push at all levels to get this kind of protection for local food production in place.
Do you think it's worth preemptively now using that bill as a pattern and going to our local authorities, our city, our state now, preemptively, and getting that on the books now, rather than waiting for something bad to happen and then trying to battle it?
Absolutely. Yeah, because for two reasons. For one thing, when the bad thing happens, people are in that fear state. And so they're more likely to swallow whatever the lie is and go along with this new regulation until it causes even more of a problem. And for another, we have now these last 12 months to point at and say, look at this. There's disturbances in the supply chain. In fact, they're worsening. There's container shortages. Things aren't moving where they're supposed to. There's now fertilizer shortages. The price of phosphate is going through the roof. So we can point it objectively at this reality and say, we need to be opening up avenues for local food production. We need to be getting out of the way so that we can feed ourselves. There's no good reason not to be returning to. And I use that very deliberately because it is throughout all of history that we've been growing our own food and feeding our families and our communities, right? This is not a radical idea that I'm suggesting we all move into a little crazy thing. No, we need to protect what we've always done. And it is sad that that's the case now, but it's where we are. And so, yeah, I do think it's a good time to have those conversations, Bear.
I'm so glad that you understand that because one of the uphill battles I've had to fight is the concept that the guy that wants to grow his own food is radical. That's the anomaly, to the world. I'm the strange person. And I'm like, you realize it's only been the last 100 or so years where that wasn't the case. And as you've said, there's been so many supply chain issues. Just, a brother of mine said to me about a year ago, toilet paper. It didn't matter if you were willing to spend $1,000 a roll, you couldn't get it. It didn't exist. So regardless of the price and availability are both factors. If it's not there, it doesn't matter how much money you have. And I think there's a lot of people that think they might be able to buy their way out of this. You end up in a Weimar Republic situation where you've got a wheelbarrow full of cash for a loaf of bread. Mm-hmm. Well, that's bad news anyway. I don't want to spend I don't have a wheelbarrow full of cash for a loaf of bread. That's why I got buckets and buckets full of wheat and, a country living grinder. I'll make my own bread. But availability matters more in my mind than price. If it's not there to get, it doesn't matter how much money you have. And you're right. We have this pattern over the last 12 months and much longer, actually, if you look back at it. Things are systemically getting worse when it comes to food availability. And just the fact that you understand that it's not crazy to grow your own food. In fact, it's good. That's wonderful. You know, and I'm big into my Bible, and in Genesis, the Adamic covenant between the Father and Adam, the Father originally made man to rule and subdue. That's a very interesting thing. Hey, go out there and take care of this place, right? And that for a big part of me are these systems that we talked about earlier, and producing your own food and taking dominion over, stewardship over the land and the animals and all of that. That's a big part of why we were made. And to deny that, at least for me, it makes my soul hurt. And so I'm glad that you don't think I'm crazy, at least in that facet. I might be crazy in other facets, but at least in that one, I appreciate your support. You know, and for me, one of the things that's really become, that I've become much more aware of lately is that, especially in light of the most recent federal elections, there's been a lot of people, not myself, but there's been a lot of people who are self-stylized patriots that we're going to go do something. Okay, how do you take direct action against the system you're dependent upon? It's like, mom won't let me take the car out and I'm really upset about it and I'm going to write her a strongly worded letter. Well, it's still mom's car. You still live in her basement. You eat her Cheetos. What are you actually going to do about it? So until you get out of the basement, until you get off of the drug that is the system and go out into the world and start taking care of yourself, it's very difficult to be proactive in a lasting way if you're tied to the fragility of that system. How do you revolt against it? And I'm not asking you an answer there. I'm just saying that's an observation that I've had, is that it seems ideologically dishonest to say that we're going to go do something about the very thing that's perpetuating your existence. You know, you can't destroy the house that you live in if you still live in it, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it's a great point. You know, if the 13 colonies had been depending on ships to come in from England every week with food on them, then I don't think they would have revolted at all, right? We could send King George a slightly strongly worded letter. You're right. That's about as far as we get.
Right. We're very unhappy, but we're also hungry. So keep it coming, you know. Well, man, that's all I've got for you. If you've got any questions for me, I'd be happy to have them. But otherwise, this has been an absolute blessing, and I thank you for your time, sir. You're a rock star.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just reminded also, was it 316 is after the fall, it is by the sweat of your brow that you will eat, right? And so it's part of the charge. This is part of why we're here, is to work with the earth, is to grow our own food and have that relationship with the earth. And I've spent some time thinking about, does that mean that sort of even grocery stores are like a satanic creation because they take our sweat off of our brow and now it's really easy. I don't know if I'm willing to go that far, but certainly where it's headed right now, right? Certainly where you need the mark to get in there, where all of the food in there is defiled, if natural at all. It is gene modified, and everything about the creation has been changed. The fake meat is just a completely ridiculous situation where they're now talking about scraping your cheek to make human steaks. You can have a bear steak for dinner. Yeah, it's like I said, sort of at the outset, it's not that hard anymore to discern that what's going on in general, but even specifically with food, is really profoundly troublesome. Yeah.
Well, and that gets back to availability too. There will come a point sooner or later where they say, you know what, Christian, you are no longer allowed to shop here. Right. And so you won't even have access to, a bear steak for dinner, because you are the other. You haven't taken the mark, which gets into your own independent systems, your own resiliency, your own network with your buddy with the alpacas and your friend that does this and that, right? That is what we are trying to foster, because I truly don't know if we are in end times or if this is just a speed bump on the road of life. I do know I can read Matthew 24, and everything that Messiah talks about in Matthew 24, we're seeing iterations of now. And that's makes me a little bit uncomfortable, to say the least. But it's not just about whether or not you want to eat the genetically modified food, which I don't. It's also about, will you even have access to it? And if you don't have access to it, what are you going to do? Are you going to starve to death? You know, and people, a lot of people like to say to me, well, the Father will provide. Well, maybe he's providing you two guys on the internet right now saying grow food and stack food and make friends. You know, the way that he provided for Joseph in Genesis 37 was to interpret Pharaoh's vision and say, hey, you need to stack 7 years of food, right? And so it's not just about whether or not you want to eat that. It's, will you even have it available to you? I would much rather be butchering my own cows and having a real steak for dinner, you know, with some potatoes that came out of the garden and some nice asparagus out of the beds in the front yard, than have to go buy genetically modified frog lizard steak thing because that's all that's available. So
yeah, I mean, as the expression says, trust in God, but row away from the rocks. And growing food is absolutely part of rowing right now. We got to be building up those stores. I do think there's a point to, you know, to your point there, where there is literally a divorce between, a decoupling between the stuff you can get at the store and literally a black market of homegrown food with heirloom genetics, and it's approaching faster than one might have thought. But again, all the more reason to get ahead of that, to start raising your animals and growing food now. Yeah.
Well, think about how much healthier and stronger we'll be, and better looking too. So, brother, you are awesome. IceAgeFarmer.com, Ice Age Farmer YouTube channel, Ice Age Farmer Patreon, the Greater Food Alliance. Is there anything else you want to tell the Bear Nation before we bounce?
Yeah, find me on Telegram, t.me/IceAgeFarmer. And thanks, Bear, for all you do. You do great work. I've had lots of folks come over and say, Bear sent me. So really appreciate all you do, and keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, brother.
Thank you.